My sincere thanks for your willingness to support us in this interview concerning your experience as a former recruiter of young women from your country into trafficking to Southern Europe. Let's start at the very beginning. Can you give us a little background as to what your life was like prior to you getting involved in the trafficking chain?
Wow. The truth is this, I never knew anything about it when I was in my country. I didn't hear of it because I was a teacher. I taught for 15 years. I was approached by an old friend at my school who insisted that there were much better opportunities abroad in Southern Europe. She mentioned that if I was interested, her brother could send me a visa and a letter of invitation. I was. Very quickly, my friend's brother sent a fake visa, and before I knew it, I was in Northern Europe, where I was met by one of my friend's contacts. My friend's contact initially took me to a school, since I came on a student visa, but then later confiscated my travel documents. It was then that I first sensed that something was wrong. Unfortunately, because could not cross over from North to South Europe in time, my friend who arranged my travel abandoned me angrily. After studying in Northern Europe for a year, I decided to move to London. It was then that I found out that the visa I had been given was fake. So instead, I moved to Southern Europe, transiting through various countries. On getting to Southern Europe, I reached out to various family relatives and in laws that were there until one of them, my sister in law, agreed to accommodate me at her home. Upon getting there, a lot of things were going on. I saw women and girls being paraded and several older women negotiating over them. I became curious and asked my sister in law what was happening. She then told me the secret. This is how people make their money here. Either you recruit young women from my country and offer them for sale to the highest bidder, or you are a trafficker who purchases the recruited women and girls upon their arrival in Europe from recruiters. Because I was desperate for money after leaving Northern Europe, I got involved in the recruiting and trafficking of girls. I recalled that I had a friend back home who was a pilot, and so getting fake visas and transporting the girls from my country was made easy once I started collaborating with him. I would recruit the girls, telling them that they would be doing what they would be doing in Southern Europe, prostitution, and inform them that they would owe me anywhere between 50,000 to 60,000 euros. My pilot friend would help me bring the girls over and I would sell them to the highest bidder. I thought to myself, if this was the way of making quick money, then I would get more involved, as the money actually came in rather quickly. I then started to also traffic the girls, forcing them into prostitution. After 3 to 4 weeks, my sister in law and I had a falling out, so we had to separate. Even though I was no longer living with her, I continued growing my personal network to increase the number of girls I was recruiting, selling, and trafficking. The truth is, if you don't have them, the girls, you are not rich. Once you do, you will have a big house from which they will be working for you. All you have to do is sit back and collect and calculate the money. That was all. So, yes, that was how I got into the whole thing.
Did you start recruiting women and girls from your community or elsewhere in your country? Please give us some details on how the process went from your country to Southern Europe.
Yes, I was recruiting women and girls from my region. The girls were eager to travel abroad as they had a flair for expensive things. The moment the news spread that you, as a recruiter or trafficker, are home on holidays from Southern Europe or from any part of Europe, you will see their parents of young girls and others flooding your house. It's almost as if there is an agent who has his ears to the ground in order to know when somebody has come in from overseas. Before you know it, strangers start arriving at your door or pleading with someone close to you, pleading that you take their children back with you abroad. Before you know it, your house is flooded. There was a time when I recorded something. The lady didn't know I was recording, but she brought her daughter, a young girl who was still in school, very pretty girl. I said to her, Madame, you know what the girls do once they get to Europe, right? Her response was that if it, prostitution, didn't kill the other girls, it certainly wouldn't kill her daughter. All that mattered to her was that her daughter travelled abroad so that she found a way out of poverty and suffering. I then asked her what kind of suffering she was experiencing. She asked me to take a look at her and compare her to myself. Because she knew that her daughter would be forced into prostitution and didn't care, I asked her why she, as a mother, didn't make the trip overseas and let her daughter stay behind. She didn't give me an answer. She just continued to plead with me to take her daughter abroad. And so, you see, it was easy. I grew my network to the point where I had agents scouting for and then connecting the girls to me. The supply was endless. I remember some girls were also being recruited from the neighbour state. In fact, from all over, but most of them were from my region. They will tell you that they understand the nature of the job they would be doing overseas. In fact, many of the girls were being pushed by their mothers into it. To their mothers, it was no different from the girls having boyfriends that they had sex with. What I mean is, since they're already having sex, they might as well have paid sex to remove the family suffering. In fact, some of the parents were worse than my agents. They were ready, willing, and able to give me whatever I wanted. Some gave me their land. Others were constantly praising me just so I could take their children back to Europe with me.
Please help us understand what some of the gaps are in local and national government that allow for the proliferation of recruiting and trafficking of other girls overseas. What aspects of prevention are missing that should be in place?
Sincerely speaking, the system has been set up to allow it. But before I address that, the truth is that it all starts from home, particularly the mothers. The mothers of our children readily betray them. They do not even consider the impact of such journey or lifestyle on their children. All they are after is the money so that they can get out of their suffering. Many of them want their children to leave their villages and come to the city. They are eager to get rich at the expense of their children. Some of the children get lucky and are transported via flight into Europe, while some unlucky ones travel by land and die in the process. Back to my country. The reality is that the economy here is not encouraging at all. No care, no health care, the infrastructure is bad, inconsistent electricity, nothing to really encourage the girls to work, nothing. So for young girls to see someone who went abroad last year returning home to buy a plot of land to build with gold all over it, while she is struggling on next to nothing income, it causes them to want the same thing for themselves. Such girls are willing to travel at any cost. If the government, the states, or even the parents ensure that the girls get assistance, incentives, encouragement, small business loans, the way that it's happening in other places, nobody would leave our country. Nobody would leave a country with good healthcare or good schools. So, sincerely speaking, I think the country or the people or women or girls have become accustomed to this, traveling overseas and being forced into prostitution as a way of life. So much so that it's almost part of our culture. In fact, there is no home in my region that does not have at least one, if not two, daughters living outside of the country. So, regardless of whether or not they are doing the right thing, nobody cares, as long as they are sending the money back. Another major problem is that 80% of the girls who were successfully recruited were illiterates. Many of the young women I recruited that were educated had a big issue with being forced into prostitution in Europe. They were rebellious and stubborn and gave me a hard time because they could not cope with that way of life. But the illiterates that came, oh, they were willing to do everything. So if my country or Europe really wants to do anything to tackle the issue, they should ensure that the young women are educated. But many young boys who end up in Europe are also having a hard time. You see many of them hungry and begging on the streets in southern Europe. Stopping this trafficking will not be easy if the airports and borders continue to be porous. My country is a corrupt country. As long as you have money, anything goes.
How long were you involved in recruiting? And about how many young women and girls did you recruit? Did the girls work on the streets, in brothels, or something else?
Well, the experience for me, sincerely speaking, I didn't like it because it got to a stage that as a recruiter, I could no longer bear the pain I was seeing the girls go through. Their tears alone haunted me. It got to a point where I was so haunted by what I was doing that eventually I just asked the girls working for me to leave. And so that's how the whole thing just crumbled. I didn't do it for a very long time because my heart couldn't take it. Sleepless nights, fear of what they are doing now, what will happen to them and all. So I was not strong enough. I was not strong enough for it. Sincerely speaking, not many girls were recruited by me. But at one point, I was not only bringing them back to Europe from my country, I was also going through other countries, West African countries. At one point, I felt I was becoming unlucky because something would happen along the way. And even after I expended the money, the girls would not make it. This happened 3 or 4 times in a row, and each time I was losing money. Because the traffickers paid me to get the girls, they too would end up waiting in vain for delivery. Also, I never participated or forced the girls I recruited to participate in juju or voodoo rituals, something that other recruiters and traffickers were doing to keep their girls under psychological pressure. To me, it's a devil's game because I refused to participate in taking the girls for the rituals. So getting them became really difficult for me because if the girls abandoned the trafficker, I was left with piles of their debts to pay. So to me, that was how God took me out. It just became all too big a problem for me. So I just said, okay, let it go. Furthermore, I did not have my girls out on the street. That was not my way. They call it joints now. The madam would pay for it monthly. It is where they work. So if the girls wanted to use the joint twice a day or use it in the morning and come back at night, that was their choice. All the madams cared about was that they got their money. That's all.
Do you have any recommendations that will decrease the trafficking or recruiting from girls in your country? Are there any things that the government needs to put in place that you would think would be helpful in preventing the trafficking of young women and girls?
The church, number one, has failed. The church has failed. Not all churches, though. There are still some good churches. The church has failed everybody. So the churches have to rearrange their priorities. Then, our parents, too. The church should help our parents understand what the Bible is saying and what the Bible is not saying, instead of urging parents to believe that the more teeth they pay, the more this you do, the more their daughter progresses in Europe. In fact, the church is the major problem we have now. If the church is able to do a lot of things, then the government will follow. As far as I'm concerned, the church is there to correct a lot of things. It can correct greed, lust. They have failed. They are failing us seriously. So, to prevent the trafficking, it will be difficult because you cannot expect someone to go hungry or to see their children go hungry. But it's possible that COVID-19 may have slowed some things down. But a few weeks ago, I was in Europe, and even with COVID, the girls are still working. Why? Because their parents way back home still need to eat. They need to pay their house rent. But in my opinion, the only thing that has helped to slow trafficking down was the pronouncement in March 2018 when he put a curse on all recruiters and traffickers. It worked because they honor him, they reverence him and all. So it really helped to reduce trafficking at one point, but the truth is that it was temporary and people have continued. You can't tell a hungry lion to not look for food. According to them, they are hungry. In my country, the yardstick for measuring success is the number of houses you have, where you've been to. So they too, they want to belong. So it's a big problem. I don't think somebody will come today and say that we want to eradicate it. It's not possible. It's not possible. I just pray one day that a solution comes. But the way I'm seeing it, it's not possible. Even if Europe says no more visas, other countries are still there. If you block one, they will go through other West African countries, live there for some time, and then get their visas to head to Europe. So, unless the borders are less porous, the issue just continues. It needs to be taken more seriously.